Hello, everyone. My name is Tong Meng. I'm a PhD candidate in Durham University. Today, I will be talking about the paper I published in May this year, titled Love in a Transient Sexual Field, UK-based female Chinese international students' racialized desire on mobile dating applications. My presentation will be divided into 4 parts, including the background of my research questions, and methods I adopted, and finally, the key findings. So now I will start with the background information. As this research focuses on dating apps, I will briefly introduce the use of dating apps now. By 2025, over 350 million people around the world are using dating apps. These platforms reduce third-party influences like family or friends and give users greater autonomy in partner selection. Thus, individuals don't need to depend on their friends to find partners. They can just use their phones to do that. When you use dating applications, you will go through 3 main steps. So firstly, you need to create your own profile. You can upload a summary of photos, write a short bio to introduce yourself and show your interests. After doing that, you can see other people's profiles. You can decide which person you would like to match with. Depending on the app's design, you swipe or tap to express your interest. And then if both users show mutual interest, congratulations, you are matched and you can begin chatting and maybe one day you can meet offline. So at this stage of browsing profiles, a key question arises: who should I date? Users often consider other people's appearance, educational background, location, income, religion, and so on and so forth, and notably, race. Previous studies have found that race plays an important role in partner preferences and selection, both online and offline. And this becomes particularly salient in the context of transnational mobility, where dating preferences and racial dynamics often change in different cultural contexts. In what follows, I turn to the case of interracial dating in China and explore how these patterns change when Chinese international students move abroad. Now, I will introduce some detailed information about interracial dating in China. After 1978, China's reform and opening up policy brought more foreigners into the country. Interracial dating and marriage became more common, but they were also seen by some as threatening to family lineage or cultural heritage. Especially for older generations, they often view such relationships negatively. In these cases, the judgment is often gendered, especially toward Chinese women in relationships with Western men. They may be stigmatized as sexual deviants, traitors of the nation, and even white folk. So this made me wonder, what happens when female Chinese international students move to the UK? When they enter an environment like the UK, where interracial dating opportunities are more accessible, how do they respond? What do they experience? Then I looked at existing literature, and I found that most previous studies were conducted in the US, Canada, and Australia. They concluded contradictory findings. There are 2 main gaps. So first, most studies treat migrants as a homogeneous group. And second, they rely heavily on large-scale quantitative data and overlook the nuances of temporary migration. However, Chinese international students are not the same as first and second generation migrants. Chinese international students stay in the UK shortly, usually 1 to a few years. Their futures are uncertain and influenced by visa policies and life transitions. Based on these gaps, I proposed 2 research questions. What are female Chinese international students' racial preferences in partner selection on mobile dating applications in the UK? And why do they have such racial preferences? So now I will turn to the methods I adopted in this research. To answer my research questions, I conducted semi-structured interviews with 18 female Chinese international students in the UK. They are mostly from middle-class urban family background, and they were aged between 20 and 30 years old. And then I used reflexive thematic analysis to analyze the interview data. Theoretically, Actually, I built on Bourdieu's theory of practice and Green's sexual field framework, and also incorporated the concept of transience proposed by Gomes. Then I proposed a new framework called the transient sexual field. This concept captures how students' temporary migration status shapes their dating experiences. Specifically, I conceptualized China and the UK as two distinct sexual fields. Within the UK field, I highlight a subfield called transient sexual field. So in transient sexual field, participants' transient nature of life influenced their dating experiences and establishment of intimate relationships in the UK. I now turn to the findings of this study. Regarding participants' racial preferences on dating apps, I found that out of the 18 participants, most of them explicitly avoided dating Chinese men, citing reasons such as Chinese patriarchy, negative past experiences of dating Chinese men, and their transient nature of their stay, which I will elaborate more in a minute. And only 3 exclusively dated Chinese men, mainly because of shared language and cultural familiarity. So since the majority said they wouldn't date Chinese men, I asked a follow-up question. So who would you prefer to date? Most participants responded that they prefer dating foreigners or 外国人 in Chinese. But when they said foreigners, they were usually referring to white men. White men were commonly viewed as attractive and desirable. Some participants also mentioned an interest in ABC, American-born Chinese, or BBC, British-born Chinese men, though they were often seen as less desirable than white men. In contrast, men from other racial and ethnic backgrounds, such as Black men, Indian men, and Middle Eastern men, were rarely considered as potential dating partners and were often excluded from participants' preferences. And then I asked more questions about why they have such racial preferences. I then generated 3 themes from their responses to explain their racial preferences, including Chinese patriarchy, transient migration status, and racial stereotypes and hierarchy. First, many participants mentioned patriarchal norms in China and their previous unhappy dating experiences with Chinese men. For example, Jenny said, most Chinese men are average but arrogant, and they never respect women but objectify us as capital for them to show off. My ex-boyfriend shared our sex life with his classmates on a WeChat group to show his sexual potency. And after experiencing that, when Jenny moved to the UK, she stopped dating Chinese men. And Kelly mentioned her relationship with her father, like he felt her father is not a very good man. Kelly said, my father is a traditional Chinese man who always ignores my mother's emotional needs and wants to control her life. He also requires me to be a submissive and obedient girl and forces me to follow his planned path. However, other groups of participants, they refused to date Chinese men because they felt they were not attracted to Chinese men. For example, Laura said, when I was living in China, I did not receive any dating matches from Chinese men on dating apps. My head and body shape were not desirable, and some users even called me fat. Honestly, I experienced body shame at that time. Similarly, Daisy mentioned that Chinese men like women who are fair-skinned, young, and slim. However, Daisy felt that she did not conform to such fair-skinned, young, and slim beauty standard, and she was not very attractive in Chinese dating market. And that's why she refused to date Chinese men. And Candace also mentioned about trait. So Candace said, I'm too sharp for Chinese men, and she believes that's why most Chinese men refused to date her. And the second reason is the one I want to highlight in my research in this paper. I found that the transient nature of these participants' stay in the UK play a very important role in their partner selections, in their racial preferences especially. So Lee mentioned that I stay in the UK only for 1 year and I want to gain new experiences. If I want to date Chinese men, I can do it when returning to China after graduation. So Lee sees her stay in the UK as a time for experimentation. So she tries to experiment with different types of relationships and with people from different cultural backgrounds and racial groups. And Eve said most Chinese students will stay in the UK for only several years or even 1 year, and their future plans after graduation are uncertain. Very few of them are interested in establishing long-term serious relationships here. So Eve pursues a long-term monogamous relationship in the UK. However, she felt that most her Chinese peers only stay in the UK shortly, and they don't want build like long-term monogamous relationships like her. So she just refused to date Chinese peers. And E, 25 years old, said foreigners often compliment me and say I'm pretty. So some participants like E experienced an upward sexual mobility in the UK as their sexual capital or their appearance is valued in the UK more than in China. And another very interesting thing that my participants mentioned is their perception of promiscuous, intimate lives of Chinese international students in the UK. Firstly, like Cindy said, many male Chinese students start dating one person, sleeping with another one, and quickly cohabitate with yet another person. So that's what Cindy believed. And a second situation they mentioned is relationship vacuum, what I called relationship vacuum. So they mentioned that the distance from China has enabled the Chinese international students to maintain multiple romantic relationships simultaneously and secretly, one in China and one in the UK. So they felt really insecure about dating their peers, so they refused to do that. And then I found very salient racial stereotypes and hierarchy in participants' responses when they choose their partners on dating apps. So, for example, they believe that white men are desirable because they are good men due to their linguistic capital and cultural capital. For example, some participants only dated white men and English native speakers to practice their English speaking, and they also seek support from their partners to proofread their academic writing. And Cho told me that I should not only stay in the social circle of Chinese international students, but also seize the opportunity to learn about Western culture and broaden my horizons. Dating locals is the best and most effective way for me to achieve these goals. However, they mentioned that they don't want to date like black men and Indian men because they have very, negative perceptions about these groups. For example, Dizzy said, black males are very strong with big muscles. I'm afraid they will beat me. And Cho said Indian people are too skinny. And Candace told me that Middle Eastern people usually force their partner to follow their religion. So we can see that there is very clear racial stereotypes and hierarchy in their partner selection process. So in conclusion, most UK-based female Chinese international students in my research avoided dating Chinese males on dating apps, but preferred out-group daters, among which white males are most desirable. Female Chinese international students' interracial dating preference is influenced by Chinese patriarchy, racial stereotypes, and their transient migration status in the host country. There are some key references, and thank you for your attention. So actually, this paper has been published in May, and if you are interested in it, please check it out. You can scan this QR code, and if you have any feedback, if you have any questions, please send me an email or contact me on Twitter. Thank you very much.